Hey Tony, it's Tuesday. First off, to answer your question of the week, there are two that I particularly think of. The first one was a good death. The second one was a bad death. So the first one that was the really good death, that is one I kind of look at with a lot of happiness in a way. It was in a Game of Thrones game that I was running, and my friend Casey was playing as the Lord of the House. And I know you're not very familiar with Game of Thrones, but it's all about plotting, backstabbing, scheming, just like the show is. And this was one of my favorite plot points I ever made in a game. So my friend was the Lord of the House, Lord Cass Rabit, and he was sworn to Tywin Lannister. The Lannisters are kind of the bad guys of Game of Thrones, but um, so he was sworn to them, and basically, like through a number of events, he kind of fell out of favor with Tywin Lannister, and he was sent up north to basically be the governor of a conquered town. When in reality, he was going up there to die, and he was eventually killed. But it completely changed the way the game worked because the house changed from being in the Lannister lands to go down south to basically the enemies of the Lannisters, the Martells, and it was really cool, and it completely changed the story. And that's one that we all look back as like that was a pretty good death. That was one that we actually really enjoyed. And the other death was a really bad one that none of us were happy about. We had one session of a game with a guy who we don't really hang out with it. We don't hang out with anymore because he moved away, and he's not exactly a great person. But what ended up happening was he was running a combat, and three of our characters died, and those three characters were kind of the heart and soul of the party. So we kind of look at that as like that was when the game just stopped being fun. But so those are the two that really stick into my mind as far as like deaths in a game. The way I tend to do things is I don't like, with the exception of like, depending on, I guess it depends on the game. I want my deaths to mean something in games when I DM them. I don't like just, oh, you ran out of hit points, so you're dead now. Sorry. Because I want it to have a more narrative focus. So and that's why I always give people the option of like, okay, do you want that character to survive or not? That was why, like, when I gave you the option with your Nilfgaardian soldier, I was like, hey, do you want him to survive or not? And you said, nah, he can die. I made him die. And there have been other games in which, like, a character was dropped to 0 HP, and unless it's a game that's all about, like, death and kind of getting through that, like, again, like Game of Thrones, because I've killed off many characters in Game of Thrones because it's the way it works. Um, but I kind of I want them to mean something, because I've been in games in which a character died and it was pointless. No one didn't serve a narrative point. It didn't really do anything except just kill a character and make one person have a lot less fun. So I don't like doing that usually, and I always give my players a choice of like, okay, you can live or you can die. If you live, we're gonna have to like work through a narrative reason as to why you lived, and maybe there's something you have to do. So in a good example of that is in a game called Dungeon World, which is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, in which, since it uses the same system as Masks basically, and there's a way you can die in it, but you roll a death saving throw basically, and depending on what you roll, it can ultimately adjust. Like, do you make a deal? Do you die? Do you live outright? Or do you have to make a deal with death? And it really leads to a lot of fun stories. Like, we had a character who partially succeeded on his role, in which he had to make a deal with death, and it was basically like a life for a life, and that life was like a chieftain of a different barbarian band. And so a big part of that story was having to do that. And I really like that because it serves a purpose. It adds to the plot and it makes it more interesting. And that's my opinion on death in games. I'm not the biggest fan, but if it's done right, then I think it can be a whole lot of fun. So Tony, my question for you is, what's your opinion when you're DMing on death in games? Tony? I'll see you on Monday I'll see you on Thursday or Friday. Later, bro.